Afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm so happy to see you all are here to join us for today's discussion around healthcare leadership excellence. We're going to get started at 4:03. And actually, as we get started, let's start by sharing where we're calling in from. So I'm going to start in the chat and make sure your chat is set to hosts and panelists to everyone. I'm calling in from Villanova, PA. Please join me in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from around the world, or at least the country. All right.
I just saw Ancaster, Canada.
There you go. All right, we're spanning the coasts here. We're hitting the Midwest. Hi, welcome. For those of you who just joined, feel free to chat in where you're joining from. And we'll get started at 4:03. Hello. All right, well, it is 4:03, and in the interest of time, I am going to welcome everyone. Good afternoon, all of our attendees and esteemed panelists, and welcome to Wambi's Executive Healthcare Panel event series. You're tuning in today for our Humans at Work in Healthcare panel, and I am very excited about what's to come. I'm Rebecca Metter. For those who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Wambi, and I'm very honored to serve as your host and moderator for this inspirational group of healthcare executives. Our mission at Wambi is to bring compassion to the forefront of human experience. And we do this with our holistic recognition and cultural transformation solution that addresses both patient and staff experience by harnessing the power of gratitude. And we believe that by operationalizing a culture of gratitude, we can deepen connections between all people in healthcare and improve the human experience for all. And as part of our commitment to this experience and this work, we have doubled down in our efforts to increase the connections across people-first leaders in healthcare. And that's why we created this impactful panel event series. Before I introduce you today to our panelists, I wanted to share a few things to prepare you for this energizing hour of conversation. So first of all, for your best experience today, I recommend that you put your screen into gallery view to be able to see all panelists. To do that, you can click view at the top right of your screen and select gallery mode. In addition to our panelists, we have some of our team members that are going to be chiming in and joining the chat for a meaningful interactive experience with you, as well as some polling questions that are going to come out. So feel free, share your thoughts in the chat, comment on what you're hearing, ask questions there, and we will try to circle back to your questions before the end of today's panel conversation. On that note, I wanted to also share that we recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in its vastness and also as really the cornerstone for everything we do, especially as we look at our panel today on humans at work in healthcare, how important for us to think about the DEI lens. And with that, all of our panelists are going to be keeping this in mind as they answer the questions, of course, as they go about everything in their work. And in fact, in the spirit of this, many of our questions today have come from our audience that were submitted prior to today's conversation. And it's so important to us to be able to honor a diversity of perspectives and curiosities with everything we do. So not just the questions that were prepared by Wambi are going to be shared today or by the panelists, but rather it is questions from you all, the attendees, and we appreciate that. So I wanted to share that as an intention for today, for us to keep that sort of in the forefront of our minds as we think of all humans in healthcare and represent them both in mind, body, and spirit as we're thinking about the sort of vulnerabilities and the impact that some of our answers will have today. As for what you can expect, I'm going to start off by introducing each of our amazing panelists, and then we'll get to the questions that I shared before. Feel free, again, share your comments and questions in the chat. We will have time at the end to address some of those questions, and for those that we don't get to, don't worry, we will circulate them with our panelists and get back to you in the near future with responses for them. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our amazing group of panelists today who are going to be sharing their top priorities in building a thriving workplace for all. And I'll start by introducing Dr. Ophelia Byers, who is the Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And she is a speaker, author, and self-described culture cultivator and waymaker. Dr. Byers has been in the nursing profession for over 21 years, inclusive of a clinical background in women and children's health and progressive leadership roles over the last 12 years. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, team engagement, and leader development are key priorities in her leadership practice. And in that vein, her doctoral research was published in a co-authored peer-reviewed manuscript, Giving While Grieving, Racism-Related Stress and Psychological Resilience in Black African-American Nurses. Dr. Byers, her husband, and their 2 children live in the New York metropolitan area. So welcome, Dr. Byers. Thank you, Ophelia, for joining us.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very excited about this panel.
Good. We are so excited to have you. Today, we also have with us Sebastian Gerard, who is the Chief People Officer at Centura Health. Seb joined Centura Health as Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer in July and is currently responsible for the strategic and operational advancement of their human resource division. His career spans more than 20 years in overseeing operations, sales, human resources, and talent acquisition teams, profit and loss statement management, and adapting the people strategy to market needs in the human resource service provider and healthcare industries. He previously served as Senior Vice President of Workforce Operations at Atrium Health in Charlotte, North Carolina, and as the Workforce Officer for Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Seb holds a Master's of Business Administration from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Thank you so much, Seb, for joining us.
It's just an honor to be here, and I cannot wait to share with Dr. Byers and Paula. So thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And Paula Pretzel, welcome to you, Chief Human Resources Officer at Marshfield Clinic Health System. Paula has 33 years with Marshfield, which is a health system with over 12,500 employees, physicians, and APCs providing care in rural communities within Wisconsin. She has 4 years in administration working with the CFO and 29 years within HR. Most currently, Paula serves as CHRO for the organization and is driven by the premise that, quote, people are my passion and kindness is my motto. Paula believes that if we are passionate about our employees, treat them with kindness and respect, provide challenges and growth opportunities, engagement will be natural. It is her mission to instill the impact of what a simple gesture can have on someone, many times without us even knowing it. How beautiful. Thank you, Paula, and welcome.
Thank you.
And we are also going to have Zane Zubal join us very soon. He's running a few minutes behind because he had a board meeting that was rescheduled, and we'll keep him a little bit delayed from us, but we'll join in the next few minutes here. So happy for him to be able to come. And I do want to introduce Zane so that you know a little bit about his background for when he joined. So Zane is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Cancer Treatment Centers of America. He is a human resources leader with global experience in large-scale innovation to drive strategic transformation and growth. He is focused on driving business value, optimizing performance, reinvigorating continuous learning, driving the ongoing evolution of talent attraction and fostering engagement, diversity, and inclusion. Zane joined Cancer Treatment Centers in July, following a 25-year career at IBM, where he held various leadership roles in the United States, Sweden, and Japan. Most recently, he served as VP of Human Resources, supporting the synergy efforts for IBM's acquisition of Red Hat in Armonk, New York, which helped strengthen the company's position in the hybrid multi-cloud sector. He also earned a master's degree in human resources and labor relationships from the Michigan State University and a bachelor's of science in psychology from University of Illinois. So we will welcome Zane when he's able to join us. And with that, thank you all for being here. Let's get on with the discussion. And I'm just really excited to dive into our first question because it's a pretty broad question that I think is a beautiful way for us to start and really get into the mode of sort of bringing the things that we care about most to the forefront. And I know everyone is so excited to hear what each of you are most passionate about and what is your top priority in building a workplace that fights burnout and strives to create meaningful work experiences for everyone within your organization. So with that, would you like to kick us off, Paula?
Sure, I would love to. This question, there's a few priorities that we have, but actually I would have to say the top right now has to do with relationships and engagement. The past year and a half, 2 years has been extremely difficult within the healthcare, within the world. And to try and recruit individuals and retain individuals within healthcare is extremely difficult. And anything that you read now is about how people may be leaving healthcare or are just completely burned out. And what we're focusing on is engagement and what we can do within our work environments in order to give individuals that break, in order to let them know that we do care and that we are behind them. And I look at this similar to a vehicle. Some people say that employees are your most important asset. I don't see it as an asset, but I see it as a vehicle to success. And just like you would with a vehicle, you take care of it. You know, you make sure that there's regular checkups, you make sure that you provide it with the best tools, parts, etc. Well, we need to do that with our people too. We need to be checking on them. We need to be flexible. We need to be able to get to know them, not only as our employees, but as people. And what's happening outside of work that may be impacting their ability to really focus and reduce their stress. And so ours is engagement and having our managers and our leaders engaged with our workforce. And not that we're going to be able to solve all the problems, but that we care and we want them to know that we care, that they're just not another person, but that they are an integral part of having our vehicle fleet run well.
Mm. So well said.
Paula, I love that you said that, talking about focusing on also what's happening outside of work is incredibly important. And if you think about it, to some degree, we do that with our EAPs, where we have counseling for major life events that are stressful for our employees. And it's along that vein that I did my research on racism-related stress in Black and African-American nurses, in thinking about social stressors, that not necessarily racism in the workplace, though that is a reality as well, but understanding that our Black and African-American employees, but truly minority stress in general, that there's so much going on in the outside world, right? And we've seen that this year, over this last year, more than ever, that amplified, but that's a reality that your Black employees know very well. And how do we, as a workplace in an environment where most of their time is spent, help them to manage that stress, that social stress. And it's acknowledging that it exists. And it's finding ways to incorporate that very unique intervention into the EAP counseling that we offer and resources that we offer. So social stress is a major thing that I don't think we've tapped into enough. And we understand it in very common ways that affect everyone, a house fire, a loss of a loved one, a divorce, but just understanding that your employees who are described as minorities have all of those same stressors as everyone else, plus this added stress related to the various isms and phobias in our society. And so that is something that we need to take into consideration as well.
And if I can piggyback, I cannot agree more with Paula and Dr. Byers. And if I can piggyback on both, because that was actually part of my answer also. What passionate me the most is to really move from a mindset of engagement into a mindset of experience. And there's a big difference between both. And I think Maya Angelou said it the best. People forget what you tell them. They're never going to forget how you made them feel. And that feeling is an experience, and it's absolutely possible to be engaged and have an awful experience. And we see it in COVID time all the time, right? We see it in some of our associates that love healthcare, love their hospital, love their unit, but then they have this awful day at work where their experience is not going well. So there's a difference between both. And the reverse is also true. I can be disengaged, and then I'm going to have an amazing experience, and that amazing experience is what's going to retain me. So that morph toward engagement, toward experience. And what passionate me the most is we all have the power to impact that, which is very impactful. And the second thing is what Dr. Byers touched on is to what passionate me also the most is to understand the source of exhaustion, because we assume that exhaustion, because it's been translated as burnout into the workplace, come from work, and it's not always true, like what Dr. Byers said. So to really morph toward understanding where's the source of exhaustion come from. Yep.
Thank you, Seb. And Zane, so happy that you were able to join us and you're in perfect time as we just talk about what you're most passionate about in creating a meaningful work environment and experience for all.
Well, you know, if it's okay. So I'm the head of HR for Cancer Treatment Centers of America, but you know, I'll piggyback on what was just said, right? I just finished my first round of golf in 10 years. And it's those singular hits that go where you want them to and actually look like what you thought they should look like. And I played, so it's 18 holes. I had maybe 2 good shots. Those are the inflection points. Those are the moments we're looking for, right? So when you invest in asking somebody if they need a hug, when you give some coaching out of your comfort zone, or when they don't expect it, and it brings their eyes light up. Earlier this morning, we met with 10 management fellows within the company, and one of the people I've been coaching told a story that was very heartfelt and talked about, you know, her father, and broke into emotion. And that's something she and I have talked about doing. And I just sat back and I went, wow, these are the things that matter. How do we open up our heart? How do we connect in a real way? How do we use those moments to fuel us and to fight and combat fatigue through all of the harder stuff, right? I mean, we get 5 minutes of that versus 50 hours of the more challenging and complex from our business. So, you know, what's most important, I try to break into vulnerability and stay very heart-based and focused, and use those moments as personal fuel, as training and fodder for coaching and development, and to see if we can capitalize on that and just do more of it.
So beautiful. You know, it's so interesting because each one of you has shared something so connected to the other. So looking at the team member as an individual, not just as another person, as Paula said, and to what Ophelia said, as looking at the outside world, what is this individual going through? And then to what Seb was saying about their experience and how each of these sort of individual experiences, and then when people get together, those are kind of added up because they become a group. And then what does that look like, you know, after we've looked at people as individuals? And to Zane's point about the vulnerability and getting to the emotion sort of heart-based part, that's the only way you can unlock someone's individuality, because then they feel comfortable enough to share with you why they're burnt out or what they were dealing with at home. So I think everything you just shared is so connected, related to your passion of really looking at people for who they are as an individual and what they bring to this work. And of course, that has its challenges when you have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 employees within an organization. And how do you do that? But as a goal, I think that it is a beautiful thing. And it starts with one-on-one interaction and kind of bringing that vulnerability out.
In a way, haven't we become a society who are doing more and more with less? And we continue to. So in that environment, it's almost sacrosanct or something you're not supposed to do to share about you or to be vulnerable or to open up. And if we're not doing it as leaders, our teams certainly aren't going to do it, or the leaders that we support won't do it. So I take it upon myself to try to lean into that and do it more often, because I've got to create the space in the aperture for others to actually really authentically feel. Because if we can't get people to feel, whether that be fatigue or anger or frustration, if we're bottled up, that's going to create a whole bunch of other downstream problems.
Yeah, and this year, or past year especially, we don't know what to expect, nor do we know what to predict. And what we're saying is, you don't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you may not have the time for perfection, but you do have the time to be present. So Zane, similar to what you're talking about, is to be present, to be in the moment with your colleagues and with your patients, and to ask what is your why? Why did you choose healthcare? To bring it back and answer, what is my why, and why am I here? And there's just a very short paragraph that I would like to share about a patient. And the patient had said about the care, about the nurse, is she made me laugh when I wanted to cry. She's exactly what you want in a nurse. She really cares, she really listens and acts on how the patient, how I'm feeling, takes the time to explain what the doctor is saying, showed me how to sit so I was actually comfortable, and knew when I needed some cheering up. I'm so lucky that she's my nurse. So when you talk about moments in time as well, and the impact, and for this particular patient, it was the nurse that made her laugh. It was the empathy, the compassion, attentiveness, explaining, physical comfort, all with, those are a whole lot of emotions in a very short period of time. So like your good hits, the good moments that make a difference in people's lives, and to be able to share that information with each other.
So true. And, it's interesting because I think when we think about our organizations and kind of scaling this type of work, really does sort of start with leadership. And one of the things that we know is that leaders are quite burnout. And it kind of gets us to our first question, which was shared by one of our attendees in previous submission for our panel today. And what this person asked was, how do you control for burnout amongst leadership in these challenging times, especially when looking at how patients are sicker, increased acuity, and also staff turnover? And I think about what you all have been sharing related to getting to the emotion and the individuals and kind of seeking there. How do we do this with our organizations?
Well, I would certainly like to just piggyback off what Paula just said about the patient's testimony, because you could take that patient testimony and imagine if that were a leader's testimony or a staff testimony about the person they reported to. Slightly changed, right, in terms of context. But imagine, being being that leader for someone on your team, be it a staff member or another leader, and them being able to say the same thing about when they connected with you, that they made me feel comfortable. They told me how to sit. So that could be they gave me direction. They made it clear on what my next steps need to be. They positioned me for success instead of told me how to sit, if you will, right? How do we take the same things that we want to see our frontline teammates do for patients and translate that to what we should be doing for our teams? And proactively and preventatively, in healthcare, we treat, but we also prevent. And one of our responsibilities as leaders is to look around corners, right? To see around corners and say, where are the potential pitfalls? And how do I, as the question says, control for that? How do I start to put interventions in place to prevent burnout? When I start to see, and not even when I start to see signs, but I know enough about burnout, there's enough research, there's enough employee engagement survey results, enough one-to-one feedback that we can start to put interventions in place. We should always do it with our teams, with the people who it's going to affect. We should not be doing them from an ivory tower view or from the boardrooms. We should be engaging them and saying, okay, what does success look like to you? What does a work environment where we understand, we're also going to be realistic and we need to manage expectations. What does there's going to be struggles, right? We didn't expect this pandemic, but how our teams are fueled up and prepared matters. And the teams that had good fuel reserves, even not knowing that a pandemic would come, were able to find their way through it. And so it's really thinking about, I often say, I look at HCAHPS surveys and say, how can I take these very questions and kind of reformat them to think about, if I ask my teammates these same questions, what would their answers be always? That I need to shop for that top box as well, shoot for that top box. So I think that was a really great testimonial and would be a beautiful one to hear from our teams.
I can't agree more with Phil. Yeah, and I'll take a different angle on the question, Rebecca. So I'm going to go back to understanding the source of exhaustion, because there's a new phenomenon, or it's not new, but it really got enhanced with COVID, and we have to be careful. So if we don't understand the source of the exhaustion or the burnout, then the solution is not going to fix the problem and can make it worse. And I'll give an example. So what we ended up finding in time of COVID is the source of the mental exhaustion was not always coming from work, it was coming from life, like what Ophelia was sharing a bit earlier on. And I can give example. I actually did a research a couple of months ago where 85 to 90% of the people that call EAPs due to exhaustion and burnout, the source of the exhaustion was not work. Their source of mental mental fatigue was financial pressure, family member being sick, social injustice, didn't feel safe, turning on the TV and it's everybody sick, or politics, or being locked between four walls due to COVID and afraid to get sick. And the reason why I'm saying that is understanding the source of exhaustion is so important. Is we are having as a mechanism when someone is tired to provide them rest. But what if work is the place where they're blooming and that they're resting, even if they're tired, and that by sending them back home, we're sending them in the place that make them being exhausted. So we have to be extremely careful. And then I've seen that too many times where we've seen to a leader, hey, you know what, take vacation. But what was making that leader being underperforming and showing up exhausted at work was being at home. And that just made it way worse. So understanding the source and then prescribing the right solution for that source. Yep.
Oh, Chairman, you're on mute.
I said I also have two teenagers, so I'm with you, Sebastian. There is some relief and relaxation in work. I mean, like some semblance of an ability to have an impact rather than people who don't know I exist and don't listen. So I think it's a great question. How do you handle it if it changes, right? There are days when home is relaxing for some and days when work is. It's very fluid. I mean, have you worked with upskilling your team's emotional intelligence so as to astutely understand where they're at any given moment?
Are you asking Seb?
Yes.
So it was from a previous life. So we need to make a couple phone calls.
Mm.
I just joined. You missed the introduction. I just joined my current organization 5 weeks ago. Like any good leaders that is exiting an organization and not bringing all the intelligence with me. So we need to make a couple phone calls.
Yeah. It's interesting, Zane, what you're saying is like, as it changed. And I think to what Seb is saying too, is like taking the temperature ongoingly, because it's like, you can talk to someone at one point in time and it changes for them. And it can change as rapidly as from an hour to hour basis. We see that, the beginning of a shift to the end. I mean, people are different at the end. So, when you think about, when you talk to people, having that sort of openness to hold a bunch of competing truths, right? Like, to what Seb was talking about with the source, maybe the source is home, but then there's also competing sort of aspects of the work aspect that's leading to the burnout. So how do you kind of hold these truths that sort of seemingly kind of butt heads for our people, as long as we preserve their truth? That's kind of what we need to know. And it was interesting what Ophelia said earlier about turning the patient experience sort of and looking at the team member experience. And I was thinking about that because it's like, we try to find out what the patients want a lot. Like, we're really trying to figure that out, right? Like, what drives the patient experience? We try to find out that in a bunch of different ways. We could probably do it in a bunch more ways. And how do we find out what the team members really want? Because sometimes with leaders, I know that there's a lot of data out there that leaders think that team members want an additional $1 on their paycheck an hour, which is true up to a certain point. But once they're at a certain point and they feel good about that, that's sort of one thing. When what team members really want is to be connected back to their purpose and to feel fulfilled in their work. So that's a big disparity when you have leaders feeling one thing, that their teams are driven by the dollar, but their teams are driven by purpose. And so, how do you get those sort of things to go together?
And we have to ask them. I don't think we ask enough. We don't ask. Having meaningful conversations with intention, asking directly, talking to our teammates like the adults and professionals that they are. Being able to have, there's something very respectful about asking direct questions and saying, the purpose of this conversation is so that I can understand more about what your lived experience is here in the workplace. Certainly, if you would like to share at home, not everybody is comfortable having those conversations. And that's the other piece that we have to understand. So we do have to take some information that we're learning from those who are willing and start to kind of offer things. Here's what I'm hearing that's out there. Are you experiencing that? I want you to know that this is a place where you can share, maybe have some multimodal approaches to being able to communicate that, because not everybody is comfortable in having a one-to-one conversation about what they're going through. But I think we need to ask more questions and ask better questions. It's not impossible. There are always touch points. One of the things I recommend to my team is when you do mid-year reviews, when you do your employee evaluations, you have to have that one-on-one discussion with each one of your employees at that time. Why not optimize that time together? That's a great time to go through a variety of things, everything to how are you doing, following up with some specific things that happened in the interim between your last conversation, to ask them how they're faring with it. Questions that we know about, how do you like to be recognized when something happens, going over what their goals are. That's a really captive time to talk about lots of things just besides feedback on their performance. So we do have those opportunities. And I think that when we use them in an intentional way, people become more comfortable with that kind of dialogue. Checking in with your teams with intention. I'll say for my teammates, when the verdict came in around the George Floyd murder, I checked in with my teams with intention. How are you doing? How are you faring? Because no matter what the outcome would have been, it's stressful. It opens up wounds that haven't really healed, and people are just kind of still functioning, but are feeling, uncertain, feeling unsafe, as was said earlier. And just knowing that someone would check in with intention about something, knowing that, yep, I'm carrying that. I'm sitting here working and the trial's at 4 o'clock during my shift and I can't step away from it, but I want to know what's going on. So, I mean, that's just one example. But I think that we have to have more of those touch point conversations with our teams. And then how are we, depending on what level you are in the organization, you may not be able to have it with staff, but how are we training leaders all along the continuum to have those conversations with the people that they report to, so that it's about a culture and not about one person, that Ophelia always rounds and asks these questions of me. That's not what we want it to be. We want it to be a leadership culture. And that's incredibly important as well. So a piece of this for me is one, asking more questions, asking better questions, and then making sure that everyone is equipped to navigate those conversations, even to your charge nurse on the floor, right? If you're the person in charge, you're the leader of that shift, how is that charge nurse prepared to check in with her people during that shift? Should he or she sense that, there's a need, or that, there's a gap in some way?
Yes, so well said, Ophelia. And it actually takes us perfectly to our first polling question, because I think a lot of what you just shared, it fits into, a strategy of team member experience. And it begins with this sort of culture of leadership and how do we do that? So for our first poll question, attendees, please weigh in, and panelists as well. The question is, our organization has a solid strategy in place to guide our employee experience and employer brand experience. So do you have a solid strategy to actually do that? So yes or no, let's see what we have. All right, while you're all taking a second to do that, I think we will see the results in a minute here, and we will get to our next question, which is a great segue from what Ophelia just shared. All right, so about half, so 55% have a good strategy in place and 45% don't. So great stuff. Okay. Our next question, which was submitted by one of our attendees, is how are you managing the current nursing shortage? And I'm going to use an exact quote of what was submitted: without going broke utilizing agency. So feel free to interpret that as you will. I'm going to open it up. Who would like to take a stab at this one? How are you managing the nursing shortage? Seth? Ophelia, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll start. I feel an obligation to start as a CNO.
Okay, good.
So that is a kind of ubiquitous, persistent question. I think that has been really, in the context of COVID, become a bigger question. So I would first want to take it out of the context of COVID, because it's such a unique situation. There's a lot of different tactics to do so, right? We want to be leaner. As Zane said, we're having to do more with less, right? And so it is a goal to be leaner. We don't want to be lean to a fault, though. We need to always be, again, looking around corners, building our pipelines, preparing our teams. So every organization is absolutely unique. Things that I'm going to suggest, you may be already doing, you may not be able to do right now, but things to keep in mind. And I'll just shoot out different things. One, I think first, before we talk about whether or not to use agency, we need to understand what got us there. Why do we have these holes? Some of them are things that just happen. You have a unit that is hard to fill, a specialty unit. Your units like labor and delivery, anything in obstetrics and women and children's health, or in the OR and the ED, those tend to be hard to fill areas. And so when you have a vacancy, a lot of times you need agency because it takes a while not only to recruit, but also to train if training is needed. So that's something to consider. But if you're finding yourself with persistent vacancies, that's a bigger question. That's more of a systems question. That's not about, you're going to need agency, but you need to also have to look at things like, what are our recruitment practices? What's going on? Why are we having the turnover that we're having and issues with retention that we're having? Those kinds of questions need to be asked because you do have to fill that vacancy. Those positions that were budgeted based on your volume or based on your census. And so you got to have the personnel there. But now you have to ask, why are people leaving? Why can't we retain them? Why are we having a difficult time recruiting? And work closely to strategize to fill those vacancies. Things like new business plans. We bring on, for example, new surgeons, and nursing needs to be at the table, not just nursing, but radiology, other areas that contribute to surgical services. You need to be at the table when there's new business planning to ensure what volume is this surgeon bringing in over time, and what FTEs do we need to support that? Because a lot of times new business plans are based on, does the surgeon have the equipment they need and the technology and things like that, but people forget to add people. Right. So if you're not making sure that you're doing that, you're going to end up needing agency to fill that gap and backtracking. So some of that in a broader way is, are we making sure that we have all stakeholders involved in planning, in business planning, for example, or anything. So stakeholder involvement so that you have the right lens on everything. One more example is talking to staff. Again, talking to the people closest to the work. That is the professional governance model that we talk about in nursing, formerly known as shared governance. I'll give two very quick examples where I learned talking to staff and decisions that I was making weren't the right decisions. So I'm looking at a particular unit that had needs. I'm always looking at skill mix. That's another piece. When you are getting agency nurses, do you need a nurse? Or do we need more nursing support personnel that could help, mitigate the needs on the unit, but not at as much of a high cost? So it's looking at skill mix with intention as well. And in doing that, there was a vacancy, and I said for a support staff, nursing support staff, patient care technician, and I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to make that a surgical tech position. It just makes more sense. We'll get more mileage out of it, that kind of thing. And then a couple of months later, I'm speaking to one of the surgical techs in the area, and she said, that position's still not filled, Ophelia. And I said, I don't know. I don't understand what's going on. And she said, well, there's no programs nearby. There's no feeder programs for that role. And based on where we are geographically, it just wasn't a role that was easy to fill. She said, I would actually be better off with a PCT. And it was so eye-opening to me. It was like an aha moment. I thought I was doing something smart. I thought I was optimizing the FTE, but really it wasn't helpful. And how did I learn that? From the person closest to the work. Right. So I think there's a number of ways that are as easy as that, and a lot more complex, that organizations have to think about how they're looking at their nursing care hours, how they're analyzing the workforce. But in the context of COVID, I will say that agency is just needed. And I think that's just something that organizations have to swallow and be okay with. Organization, our teams need the help, again, to prevent the burnout and even the resentment that can happen with an unwieldy workload.
Thank you for that, Ophelia. Appreciate that. And I love hearing, I appreciate how you stepped in on that as a nurse leader. So I appreciate that. And you guys, this is going by so quickly. We have 3 more questions to answer. So I'm not going to go around to everyone else in this question. We're going to do a quasi speed round because we have 2 more questions before our final question of today's panel. And I want to make sure that we get to hear that we address these questions that were submitted before. So that was, that was a great segue, I think, to sort of some of this next sort of question. And I'd love Paula to weigh in on it if you're comfortable, Paula. And the question is this: the social and mental health impact of COVID is very real. What are the initiatives that you've seen or used to address that in this area? So Paula, if you don't mind being our sole respondent on this one.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on that. One thing that we have done that I'm incredibly proud is we have a clinical psychologist who had talked with me a number of months ago, and we were using her skill set. She is specializes in trauma debris, and so we would call her in to assist us if there was a suicide or a death of a baby, or unexpected car accident, coworker killed, etc. And she's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And we were talking, and we take care of our patients, but what are we doing to take care of our employees who are experiencing traumatic events? The number of deaths from COVID, maybe our employees weren't used to seeing 3, 4, 5, 6 a day, or seeing infants or pediatric patients passing away. So what we did is we have Dr. West on our HR team, and she's our eyes and ears on the ground, and she's weaving her way through the different units, establishing relationships, and she has the skill set to talk to individuals in real time and in the moment, and putting into place, if there is a death on a unit, to be able to debrief and talk with the staff before they go home. Because I think we may tend in healthcare to keep things internally because we care for others, but we can't say yes all the time at the expense of ourselves. And so with her expertise and developing those relationships and caring for our staff, we're going to need a lot more of her, as from the system perspective. And she has helped tremendously within our healthcare system. She's also been a part of a Heroes Health program, and this is an app-based initiative. And what it is we're rolling it out in different units so that there's a 5-minute questionnaire that gets sent out to providers, nurses, etc., where they answer a set of standard mental health well-being self-assessment questions. And then if the way in which they answer those questions triggers, ooh, there might need to be some intervention, we're there. And we swoop in and help. We have a 24/7 support line staffed by specialists. The other initiative that we did is, when Sebastian, you were talking about, people at home and such and the stress, is we heard, especially during COVID with school and with children, and I need to be at work, but my children need my help with schoolwork, etc., is we engaged with varsity tutors. And what they do is, and we paid for hours of tutoring sessions so that parents could tap into that as a resource, where it could be one-on-one tutoring, it could be reading, it could be groups, it could be answering homework questions. We had someone whose child was studying for ACT and wanted some help with that. And putting the resources in front of individuals on a regular basis, because otherwise, I think all of us know email overload, but it all in timing as well. But those were just some of the things that we've done.
That's wonderful, Paula. So comprehensive. Also love the tutoring aspect. That's really interesting. And I actually have not heard that from other organizations. I think that's really innovative and very cool. Okay, I'm going to ask another question. And this one I would love for Seb and for Zane to be able to weigh in on. So if you guys, we're going to try to get to 2 more questions today. So if you don't mind keeping your answers within 60 to 90 seconds, that would be beautiful. So here's the question, and I think it's a really important question, and something you all sort of kind of tapped into earlier, but I think it would be good to address it directly. And again, this was another question from someone who was attending our panel today. And the question is, how are you preparing future leaders to create cultures of gratitude with their people?
Trying to lead into it. So I've been talking with leaders and leadership teams recently about personal practices, right? So, I mean, one of the things that I'd started doing as chance would have it right before COVID began was meditating. So 2 practices actually, meditate. And then I was, every morning I would get up and I would write down 3 things for which I'm grateful. And boy, talk about good timing, right? Because keeping that in perspective as COVID has, taken hold and lasted longer than any expected, it was something that kept me grounded on how much I do have to appreciate and be thankful for. And I share that story, right? Because after you do it for a month, it becomes a habit. So I don't have to necessarily write it down anymore. I get up, I stretch, and I go, okay, and I stay grounded and real. So I've shared that practice, and I think I probably have 15, 20 people doing the same thing. I hope they are, and I need to follow up with them. The other thing is, it's so easy to get busy and distracted any given day, and to lose focus on the patient. I mean, from an HR standpoint, we're dealing with a lot of problems, but it's not patient centricity. So I'm trying to, we just had our board meeting, and every board meeting for us starts with a patient who comes in and tells their story, and they are so fundamentally grounding and heartwarming. She called herself a warrior princess and said, I would not be a victim through cancer. And you allowed me to be that battler who fought at every juncture. So I'm taking, I mean, we talked about what can we do with Warrior Princess. I mean, we're trying to take the patient stories and just some of the beauty that they have and hold and put that out in front of the rest of our populace who may not see that every day. So staying objective focused and finding some of the beauty in what we do and the challenges we have, and making sure that everybody resonates with why we're here every day.
Yes.
So I'll keep it in 60 seconds, which is challenging. It's really true.
90, Seb.
90, all right, that's awesome. So it's really education of the current landscape and having the leader in the right mindset to understand where we're coming from. And also exactly, so in a world where we have 2 boomers exiting in retirement and 1 Y and 1 Z coming into the employment market, so we're losing 50% of our resources. In a world where in clinical function, the unemployment rate is in the low 3%, even in the 2%, which in the US definition is full employment. So virtually everybody in healthcare has a job. So talent acquisition step to the plate, 2 strikes every single time. So your only way to win is retention. So the second you bring your leadership to understand, or your future leader to understand, finding new people is close to impossible. Your way to win is to keep the people that you have. Gratitude is a way to get there, right? And then how do you educate to lead with empathy, lead with gratification, etc. So I would go there. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So true. And what you're kind of saying is also, like, when we think about what we're grateful for, it sort of brings up sort of what's went well, like what's good. And, we start focusing on that positive aspect, whereas I think, we're so trained from just being in healthcare of looking at what went wrong, how are we going to improve this sort of clinical sort of development that we've all had of kind of getting to a certain place. And we need to get to a place of accuracy and excellent care delivery, but also looking at all of those other moments. And a lot of people keep mentioning the moments, and Paula was focusing on that as well, where it's like, well, what is going well here? And how do we bring that to the surface? How do we bring these patient stories that Zane was mentioning up and talk more about it? Which brings us to our final poll question, which we'll throw out there. My organization, and if we can trigger the poll question, this is our final poll question of the day. We could probably continue this panel for an hour. We're not going to. We are going to end it on time, but I appreciate everyone. And the poll question is coming at the attendees right now. And it is, my organization elevates the positive through formal and consistent recognition that uplifts my team members, yes or no? So curious how folks are feeling about that from a positivity perspective and uplift, especially now during these challenging times as we have Delta and fourth surges happening, especially in a number of areas in the country, some of which are actually reflected on today's panel. So let's see what we got. And then we are going to finish with our final question of the day. And each panelist is going to respond. Okay, so interesting. So half of the organizations have a formal program and the other half don't. And I don't know, we don't have the correlation here because these are anonymous polls, but I'm curious about whether the people who had the strategy in the beginning are the people that have the program. And the people who don't have the strategy don't have the program, or if it's a mix. So just something to think about. How does recognition fit into your strategy along with some of these other amazing concepts that have been brought up today? All right, finally, and I'm excited to ask this because this I think is really how it all comes together. In 45 seconds, would each panelist share with us what 3 key takeaways do you want to share to inspire our audience today around this topic, which is so unbelievably important for not just the present of those that we take care of from a patient's perspective, but also team members and the future of where we're going and our community at large. So what 3 takeaways, Seb?
And I'll jump in because I have to step out, and it was such a pleasure and an honor. The 3 takeaway is really embark on the journey from engagement to experience. There's a difference between both. And experience is a matter of creating emotion and feelings. And each interaction we have with our caregivers is an opportunity to create an experience. The second one is retention is the only way to win. Talent acquisition, play defense. The only way to play offense is retention. And retention is through creating experience. And the last one is it's our corporate responsibility to understand the source of exhaustion. Let's not assume that people are tired because they're working hard. Don't get me wrong, it's hard, it's tough, but it might not be the only source. And tackling the right source is the best way to get the best results. It was just an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seb. Appreciate you. Beautiful. What 3 takeaways? Paula, did you want to go next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. 3 takeaways, and they sound like a little bit of a cliche, but I think it really goes to a poster that I had many, many years ago that had said everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. You know, be nice, take a nap, which I love that, share, don't hit, etc. And from that, if I could sum it up, each of us has the ability, whether we choose to or not, but to embrace the ability to make a difference in someone's day. And if each of us set out to do that every day, imagine the impact that it would have. And that we also not only each day have the ability to give, but also to receive and to be open to receiving and be present. The rounding piece, throw out perfection. None of us are going to be perfect, again, but you can be present and recognize the importance of work-life balance. And as Ophelia had said, when rounding or talking with a purpose, really be observant, have your eyes open, listen to what people may not be saying verbally, but what they're saying non-verbally, and empower your staff and give them the authority to make decisions and to take action.
Thank you, Paula.
So I will add my 3. This has been an amazing time together. I appreciate it and would love another time to connect. I'd say before we speak to our teams about resilience, let's talk about recovery. that the elasticity you need, if you will, to bounce back comes from recovering wounds. And we need to think about how we are supporting our teams in that recovery before we urge them to snap back. Minority and social stress is real. We need to be at another level in our DEI maturity in organizations to embrace the reality of those stressors and to intervene with intention and with specificity, and that it's okay to reach out to people based on their unique lived experiences and vicarious experiences and intervene directly. It is not partial to do so. It is corrective. And I would also say finally that culture shift requires structural change. We know that in our society, and it's true in our organizations, and structural change is really about top-down buy-in from our boards on. It's about our policies, it's about our practices, it's about making sure that we are creating a culture of respect and gratitude through our policies, and you can do that. We need to hold our organizations and ourselves true to the core values and the missions and visions that we espouse. And so remembering that all of the things that we're saying will not hold true without an organizational commitment rooted in how we move every day. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ophelia.
Thank you to the
And
audience.
Zane, and Zane, would you like to close us out on your takeaways?
If that's okay. Leading with vulnerability and heart. I mean, as we share our pain and our hurt, others give it the aperture to do so, from which we can recover. So I thought that was well stated by others. Appreciation. I'm not doing this well enough, but I need to do more, where I just need to profusely thank and appreciate everybody around me at all junctures, right? We're all going through such challenging times that I think we get caught on the wheel and we don't stop, pause, and think. And then third is experiment and fail. We need to do so. I mean, we're in unprecedented times and without a knowledgeable answer. We don't know what we're doing in places and cases. So we have to make it up, run with it, try it, and we're going to fail, and we have to applaud that and appreciate it and try again and just fix as we go along. And then I'm going to add a fourth, because I loved what Ophelia said earlier with intention. So I took a note on that and start having more conversation with intention and listen with receptivity and see how what that might yield in the future.
So powerful. And I just want to thank our amazing panelists for just the vibrancy of the conversation, the vulnerability, the connection. I mean, I love when panelists can connect and talk to each other and kind of go back and forth. And what Zane just shared, he loved learning something from another panelist. I mean, this is what it's all about. We're all trying to become the best versions of ourselves and to help our industry to move forward. And I posted a link in the chat for us to pause and reflect on our own leadership styles. And if you'd like to take a minute after this panel to reflect on yourself and how you're sort of coming to the table as a leader, highly recommend it. It's in the chat. Feel free to take it. It's just a 1-minute reflection. And as I reflect on just this session today, I'm so grateful for the panelists. So Ophelia, Seb, Paula, Zane, thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate it. And to all of our attendees who made time to attend this, thank you very much. We appreciate you. As I shared in the beginning, we focus at Wambi on addressing the patient and team member experience through a unified holistic recognition and cultural transformation tool that's powered by gratitude. So I love how Zane just said to stop, pause, and thank. That couldn't be more effective, and we've seen it work time and time again. So absolutely love that. And so to anyone who'd like to learn more about how we do it at Wambi, feel free to type "learn more" into the chat or reach out directly to us. And with that, I wish everyone a good, healthy, and uplifting week. Thank you for the work that you do every day, and we're in this together. So we'll keep getting better. Thank you so much. Wishing everyone a good afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca.
You.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Be well.
Thank you.